So I figure we should mix it up a little bit. I want to talk about Strange New Worlds, which is the new Star Trek show. It's been around, I guess, now for maybe 8 months or so, something like that. And they're about to come out with the second season. This is the first season. They just released it on 4K. I believe the Steelbook came out, I want to say like May 18th. And then they'll have the standard box for 4K, which should come out, I think, June 2nd, 2023 is what we're looking at. But I really enjoyed this. So what I'd like to do is kind of talk about each episode. I'll just do a video per episode. This isn't unusual. There's lots of channels that have done this. But it's something that I really enjoyed, and I think I would like to talk about it as well. And I do have kind of a different perspective on it. Because I have a little bit of experience. So I think there'll be some new things said. I made a bunch of notes, so this is good. Okay, so I believe the first episode is literally called Strange New Worlds, which is cool. And it's about first contact. A ship shows up to a planet who now has a warp signature. That's the rule for Starfleet, is they will only go to planets who have learned to build spaceships like they have. They have to build a warp drive. And as soon as Starfleet can detect a warp drive on a specific planet, they go there and introduce themselves. So they detect a warp drive. So a ship goes out there, and then everything goes silent. Starfleet loses contact with the ship, with the people that were on the ship, and they don't know what's going on. So they have to call in Pike to come in and save the day, Captain Pike. So Captain Pike is a character, a lot of these characters are from the original series. Now, I think that's a very clever, fun thing to do, and it's very enjoyable to watch, especially if you've seen the old series and you kind of understand where these old characters are coming from. It makes it a lot of fun. You kind of feel like you're in the know. But I do want to say that this could have been, in my opinion, just as successful with completely new characters. It's not an essential piece of the formula for Star Trek that we know these people. It's fun to know them, and it might add a tiny bit of success to it, but overall it's just a great show. So that's not really an important thing. But we do know these characters. Pike was introduced in the pilot of the original series, and then I think it was CBS that they were with at the time. I'm not positive, but the station that they were with didn't want to do the show. They didn't like the pilot. But they did allow Gene Roddenberry to make a second pilot. So that's when he got Captain Kirk and the characters that we kind of know. Spock was in the original one. There's probably another person or two, but overall, I think Spock was the main one that stayed. And everybody else kind of got fired, basically. But later in the series, they used that original pilot as an episode. So everyone who's watched the original series with Captain Kirk knows Captain Pike because they showed that episode in a very clever way within a Captain Kirk episode. So they brought this character back. And it's fun. We'll talk more about it later because we'll talk about it later with different episodes. But for this first episode, it starts off with a lot of they've got a lot of loose ends to tie up because they actually introduced the character of Pike in Discovery. So Discovery Season 2 has a lot of Captain Pike in it. And then he got his own series, basically. So they've got some loose ends to tie up from from Discovery, and thankfully they do it rather quickly. They basically take care of it basically within this first episode. One thing that's really important to talk about with this is Paramount, of course, is doing this huge push to get a bunch of Star Trek out there. They want to do what Star Wars is doing and what Marvel is doing, right? They are a franchise, and they want to take advantage of that by having several different properties kind of running at once. Now, they had a kind of strange approach at first with introducing this because they were kind of, I'm going to put this in a very poor way. They were basically trying to rip off successful shows and turn them into Star Trek shows. So we basically have Game of Thrones Star Trek, and we have Rick and Morty Star Trek, and we have Scooby-Doo Star Trek, and we have Breaking Bad Star Trek, I guess. If we had to force a label on each of them, that's kind of where I see them landing. Now, that didn't work. It didn't work at all. And there is an important thing that I need to say, which is those kinds of topics should be able to be covered in Star Trek. It's okay that there is a Rick and Morty Star Trek. That's okay. But I hope that Paramount has realized that the caveat for that is you also, at the same time, need to have a Star Trek. If you have Star Trek, which I believe Strange New Worlds is, then you can have those other Star Treks. And Strange New Worlds will be kind of a gateway that'll pull you in, whether you're an old fan or a new fan. It'll kind of pull you in, and then you can kind of branch out into these other different approaches to Star Trek. But to me, the basic premise of Star Trek and the thing that has made Star Trek successful from the get-go has always been that you need a group of professionals who every week meet a different alien and they do their best to be nice to them. That's Star Trek. And that core needs to exist in order for other things to be able to be done. I like that they're doing other things, and they should continue to do other things, which I hope they plan on. I think they do. But they had a really rough start, because when they announced that they were going to come out with a new Star Trek, right, everybody assumed, oh, it's going to be Star Trek, right? They're going to have Michelle Yeoh as the captain, which is an awesome choice. And then it started, and it was so weird and Game of Thronesy. It was violent and sexual and bizarre, and they killed off Michelle Yeoh in the first episode. Might have been the second episode. They aired them together, so I don't know the exact moment, but yeah, wow. Yeah, it was a big old mess, and they've been adjusting ever since. And they've come out with new shows. I think the one that's needed to adjust the least is probably Lower Decks, which is a fun pun on Lower Depths, of course. But it's cool. It's funny, and every week it's sort of its own little adventure. You know, we get the same characters, but we see them do different things each week. And I think that for a little while, that was the most normal Star Trek that existed. And then Strange New Worlds came out, which really took that and ran with it, which is just wonderful. Because now they can do those other things. They can feel more comfortable trying to push the limits, right? It's like Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine is an excellent television show. It's not pure Star Trek like the original series of Next Generation. But the fun thing about Deep Space Nine was, in addition to being an excellent television show, I mean, if you haven't watched it, you should, whether you like Star Trek or not, it's excellent. But in addition to that, for part of it, for the beginning, Next Generation was still running. So you could watch the Next Generation and you could watch Deep Space Nine. And they would have characters cross over. And it was really fun to see Star Trek and then to see this other thing in the Star Trek universe. It was a neat idea, and they can do that as long as they keep Strange New Worlds around. And that does bring up another point, which is right now they're only doing 10 episodes per season, which I know is kind of becoming the norm, but it's really strange because if you're running 4 or 5 shows at once, you're not making 10 episodes a year, right? You're making 50 episodes a year. So it might be wiser to make 30 episodes of Strange New World and then 20 episodes, 10 episodes each of 2 other things that you want to kind of push the limits of, that you want to do interesting things with. Because I think that Star Trek right now is not becoming a habit. It's not keeping its momentum. It's been so long since the first 10 episodes that I don't know how much buzz the second season actually has. I hope it's a lot. I hope the show is huge, of course. I'm just a tiny bit worried about only 10 episodes and then such a huge gap. And it's lucky because we got the 3rd season of Picard, which was also, it wasn't like pure Star Trek. It wasn't like that at all. It was kind of keeping this idea of one main story going. It was basically just a big long film. But they had so many of the Next Generation characters coming back that the nostalgia factor could kind of carry you through that. And it was well written, right? It was a good movie. It was a long movie, it's 10 hours long or whatever. But it was good. It was enjoyable, especially knowing that Strange New Worlds is around. Watching that was just a ton of fun. So there wasn't like a full year gap because we did get that Picard season 3 in there. But that's a lot of stuff. Yeah, sorry, I got off track. We need to talk about this. So they need to wrap up a bunch of loose ends for Pike in the beginning of Strange New Worlds. And thankfully, they move through that quickly. Because you just don't want to watch him mope around for a season. We don't need a season of him figuring out that he can be a captain. That's just ridiculous. We want to get into Star Trek. We're ready to start watching these adventures. And there's so many amazing characters within this show. You can't take the time to focus on Pike like that. And I've watched the extra features, and the actors talk about, a lot of the people, actually, the writers and the producer talk about how they want to do a Monster of the Week, basically. They want to meet a new alien. They want its own little solo stories. But they want to have the things that occurred last week affect the things that are happening this week, which is okay. That's not the end of the world. Kind of like a hybrid thing, I think is the term they use. But they have to be careful. This can't be bogged down. We have plenty. You have 3 or 4 other series of people emoting because of the horrible things that happened 6 months ago. Seriously, we want to watch Star Trek. And like I said, I don't want to just say you can only make Star Trek, because that's completely false, right? As long as we can watch some Star Trek, we will watch the other things. Just don't try to mix the two. Or if you insist upon mixing them, can the other ones, right? Just do 50 episodes of Strange New Worlds if you're just going to blend everything together, right? Because the hybrid's okay, but honestly, when you tune in to watch Star Trek, you just want to see what weird aliens they meet and what weird kind of approach they have to have in order to treat them decently, right? So, yeah, so they got through Pike's moping pretty quick, which is great. He gets back on the ship, and they go off and they have an adventure. They rescue some of their friends. It's really a wonderful episode. It's really good once you get through the moping part. um, they show a little bit of the Earth, the day the Earth stood still in the beginning, which is super fun because it's kind of what the episode is about, right? It's a neat tie-in to be able to say um, aliens land on this planet Earth and they force everyone to not use their weapons and to gain peace, or they'll nuke the whole planet, right? Because they don't want war in the solar system or in the galaxy. So they just threaten them. They threaten the Earth and say, get it together or you're all going to die. And in Strange New Worlds, the beauty of Star Trek is they do the exact same thing, but they don't threaten them. And they don't say, we're going to kill you if you don't do it. They literally just say, this is what it will look like for you if you go down the same path we as humans did. You get to decide, you know. If revenge is that important to you, then go ahead and nuke your planet. It's okay. But there is a better option if you decide you want to do that, which is really cool. I think that's a really neat thing that they did. The 4K really looks amazing. There's a part where Pike comes out and gets on a horse, and there's a shuttle that's kind of chasing him through the snow. He's up in Montana. And it's beautiful. The 4K looks great. I do not know why they released, well, maybe I know why. It could be just pure greed, right? They could, I don't know why they released the Blu-ray that wasn't 4K a couple months after the season ended. And then, right before season 2, they're coming out with the 4K. Except for perhaps they want you to buy both. Maybe they wanted you to be so excited that you ran out and you grabbed the season on Blu-ray, and then you're going to see it in 4K later, and have to pick that up as well. I did not pick it up on Blu-ray, which is why this is coming so late. I wanted to wait for the 4K release before I did this kind of episode breakdown, and it was worth it. I mean, this is beautiful. They should have released these at the same time. And they probably should have pushed it off a bit, right? They should have waited maybe 6 months after the show ended, and then they could have dropped a teaser for season 2 and released the 4K and the Blu-ray at the same time to try to build hype. Yeah, I don't know. They did a really bizarre thing, and it's too bad because getting this steelbook was not easy at all. Like, I was going to Best Buy over and over again, and they kept looking it up and being like, oh, it's not out yet, it's not out yet. And I mean, the whole thing was just a mess. And finally, I just ordered it off Amazon. I assume after June 6th, Best Buy will start having the not steelbooks up on their shelves. But yeah, it was a mess. But it looks great. Totally worth it. Okay, so the opening credits are gorgeous. It's so neat. And they do the speech, right? Space, the final frontier. They do all that stuff, which is just excellent. If you're going to do a Star Trek show, you got to have that. That's part of Star Trek, and it's wonderful. And I'm so happy to see it, you know. And once you have that, as I've said 100 times, you can do the other stuff, right? Of course you can. You do whatever you like. But have that, please. And they finally got that, which is great. So he gives the speech, and it's the credit, the opening, the imagery is great. It's the ship flying through space anomalies of some sort, right? All kinds of colors and weird, cool stuff, which I was really happy to see because for a long time, the graphics that were used to open Game of Thrones have really dominated television. Like most TV shows these days their opening credits are some kind of weird, like, game board or layout with toys on it, and they like spawn as you go toward them. They like grow, and I mean, it, it's weird how influential that really crazy television show was. I didn't like that show at all. I respect that a lot of people did, but ugh, that was just some gross nastiness. But it really influenced everything. Even Discovery looked a little bit more like Game of Thrones and less like Star Trek to me than, of course, Strange New Worlds does, because they just went back to just flying the ship around in space, which is Star Trek. That's what you do. I mean, when you have a show that's that successful, I don't, and I can understand if people sort of started losing um, their perspective maybe once um, Voyager and then Enterprise came out, because they didn't do as well, you know. And I think it's just because they sort of strayed a little bit from what Star Trek was to people. And if they would have had a normal Star Trek show running, I think those two shows would have done much better than they did. Because you could get your Star Trek fix and then go watch this other show in that universe. Because they're great shows. That's the freaky thing, is they're great television shows, you know. I mean, you can't, Voyager is a good show. It is. Once you get to know the characters and understand where they're coming from, it always takes a couple seasons to get things really running. That's another reason I'm sort of afraid of this 10-episode thing, is it's going to take everybody a really long time to really get in the groove of this. Although they really hit the ground running, it's really good. The music's wonderful, as always, from Star Trek. It's really great. And it's got some nice callbacks to the original series. You know, it's cool. It's really good. The opening credits are great. Spock. We got to talk about Spock, because Spock is the one character that I feel like they could never replace. They could never replace the original actor, Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock. And they kind of did. Like, this guy just kills it, and the writers are killing it, and the director's killing it. They're just wonderful with the humor and the seriousness. The Spock is great, and that's the scariest part, right, for bringing these old characters in. Uhura's great, you know, and I don't think that she had enough. Michelle, I don't think the original actress, I don't think she had enough time given to her, screen time given to her. So I don't want to say anything negatively about the person who's playing her now. But that's kind of those are easier shoes to fill, because that character wasn't fleshed out as much as Spock was through the films, through the television show, unfortunately, you know. But they're all doing excellent work. There's the Nurse Chapel was in the original series, and of course, anyone below the two people on the bridge got nowhere near enough time to flesh out a character, right? They get to just basically do whatever they like with those characters. The doctors from the original series, the nurses from the original series, and they've got Kirk's brother is in the show, and I think Kirk's brother's only in one episode of the original series. He's a dead body. He's just dead. And I believe it's literally William Shatner laying on the ground with a mustache. So they brought that character back. We all know how that's going to end for him, of course. And he does have a mustache in the show. But Spock really kills it. Just excellent, excellent stuff. I have to try to read my notes here. I really love the Well, this is a weird topic to broach, but the show is not overtly violent or sexual, which I really appreciate. And I don't want to come off like none of that should be in television or anything like that. Um, it's just not something that I enjoy. If I sit down to watch a TV show, especially with family, that's not really what I'm looking to watch. You know what I mean? I just want to have fun. I want to have a good conversation about it afterward. I don't. You don't need all the rapiness and the bashing in of heads and all the weird crap that we can do these days without really hurting people. I hope. um, so I really appreciate that. That's not. Spock has a scene where his wife proposes to him, and then they go back to their house, probably to have sex, I would assume, but they get interrupted by a phone call, and Spock has to go, of course, um, and they don't get all explicit in it. It's plenty, you know what I mean? Spock has his shirt off, right? They kiss, and beyond that, there's just no need to go any further than that. We all know what's going on. So I really appreciate that. You know, they're not trying to shock people into watching, you know, which is great. It's really cool. The show is standing on its own merits, which is really nice. Um, a couple funny lines. Spock says that he can find a balance with his career and his relationship with his wife, and she says, "I remain skeptical," which is very Vulcan. There's no real emotion. It's a wonderful scene. It's really great. They kiss in the restaurant, and the maitre d' sort of flips out because you can't be doing that kind of thing in public. You know, it's really funny. It's well done. And of course, they have the show off the ship scene when the captain's flying up there because it's just part of Star Trek. You know, it's the first time we're seeing it. Uh, the captain's seeing it again, and of course, they're taken aback by it when they see it. There's a little bit of weird pikeness because he's depressed or whatever, but they get through that, which is great. So they do show off the ship. Um, Kind of a weird topic to get into. Of course, Uhura's in this. Um, there's this weird, very small but vocal minority that are backlashing against the idea of kind of woke stuff. Woke is the word for it, I guess. Um, and I'm really thankful. I've always loved Star Trek. That's kind of my main sci-fi thing. The Marvel movies are fine. I'm just a little older, so you know it's not like I watched it when I was 10. And the one that I did watch like that was Star Wars, and it just didn't stick with me as much as Star Trek did. Um, so I've always been a huge Star Trek fan, and I'm really thankful that it seems that the amount of backlash against kind of woke stuff is less for Star Trek than it is for the other two. I'm sure it's because Star Trek has always been the most woke thing around with Uhura and all of that. I mean, they've always kind of pushed those boundaries. In the first season of Next Generation, you've got men wearing dresses. Um, there's always been that element in Star Trek. So I think whoever's sort of pushing this narrative, I've heard that there's kind of a lot of Russian influence trying to get on the web and divide the nation. And of course, I'm sure there's organizations like the KKK or whatever stupid nonsense is out there that, you know, kind of troll on the internet and try to recruit people and whatever craziness they're up to, um, and kind of push that. But it's kind of nice that in Star Trek, it's very easy to just ignore them or just point out that Star Trek's always been woke. If you don't like woke, what are you even doing here? You know. That's the basis of Star Trek. Is they have a very diverse group of professionals who are all on the same level. They're all geniuses, you know. They all do their job better than anyone else. And it's really beautiful. It's really great. And it's nice to see that in this as well. I'm glad that that's continuing. And I'm glad to be part of this community instead of the others because what a mess, man. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah. Pike having a little more issues, but still he's getting over it, which is great. Spock comes in as his friend and gives him a great speech. Um, and it kind of works. It's really good. Um, it is interesting to see that old stuff because as a young person, basically as a child, when I would watch that stuff in syndication, of course, um, the Pike stuff is terrifying. It's scary. That weird chair, and he can't speak. He's just got the light for yes or the light for no. I mean, it's creepy. It's bizarre, and they sort of bring some of that element in. I don't like the carrying through of the anguish, but the approach to it, the showing of the chair and him in it, and it's well done. They did really good work on this. It's pretty scary. It's cool. Um, of course, Pike says, "I'm all ears to Spock," and he doesn't know what he's talking about, which is pretty funny. Um, and it's nice. It's nice that there's a moment where Spock, and I believe the character's name is Una, uh, and she's number one. Um, they arrive at the planet, and the ship is empty. They have no idea what's going on, but there's no other spaceships. Like if this planet has gained the ability to warp through space, there's got to be satellites. There's got to be spaceships. There's got to be something. There's nothing. So they're quickly realizing that something's really wrong. And Una, the number one, I hope that's her name, she is saying they need to put the shields up. And Spock is saying, no, 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 that's a horrible idea because they'll think we're here to fight. And it turns out that number one is correct. They should put the shields up because a barrage of missiles comes and hits the ship. And Pike, after listening to both of them, sides with her, which is really great. It's really nice to see how it works. And of course, Spock's not pissed off or, you know, I mean, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about carrying over from episode to episode. They could make 4 episodes where those two hate each other because of this one moment and stretch this out into this weird, but that's not what we're there to see. They're professionals, you know? And that was the right call. Spock made the wrong call, and nobody cares because all those ideas have to be heard so that the captain can decide what to do. It's great. It's really well done. Let's see. The doctor's great, of course. Nurse Chapel is great. They have to go down to the doctor's office because they want to change the physicality on their face so that they look like the aliens that they're going down to the planet to rescue their people from, right? So they have to get a shot, and it changes their face. And it's kind of painful, but the number one character, she doesn't want any painkillers because, you know, that's how tough she is or how strong she is. She wants to always be fully aware in case something goes wrong. She doesn't want to be doped up, you know, in case something goes wrong. Cool choices. It's interesting. It's good storytelling. Um, And the captain says, "Damn the ramparts." Nobody has any idea what he's talking about, which is funny. He has to say, "It means go ahead." The humor is wonderful. It's really great to have it because it's a serious subject. You know, this planet is going into a civil war. The entire planet. It's going to be a world war for them, and they're going to nuke each other straight up. You know, it's a very serious, interesting subject, but they've got humor all throughout, and it's just great. It's good entertainment. Um, yeah, Spock goes down, and they have to. They did a neat thing, which is they have to change their clothes to match the clothes of the culture that they're going into because they want to blend in, right? So they change their faces. And then on the teleporter, and I'm really glad they did this, on the teleporter, they alter their clothes while they're beaming down. They literally change their clothes while they're teleporting because that matter can be manipulated as it's being transferred from one spot to another, which is really cool. I don't know how much they went into that in the original series, if at all. Now, I don't recall them ever going to the costume shop to get clothes to wear, but I do know that in um, um, oh shoot, the Harlan Ellison episode, and they go back in time. Of course, they're not beaming; they go through the time portal, but they have to steal clothes. But that's not the same thing. I'm realizing because they weren't beaming. But I love that they did that. It's really cool because I've always wondered, and they do a little bit of this on Lower Decks as well. They'll show off this technology. But you wonder, like, what do they do with their uniforms at the end of the day? I don't think they wash them, right? I think they put them in the matter converter and they turn them into fresh air or something. And in the morning, when they wake up, they say, "Please replicate me a uniform." And the uniform comes out, right? They don't have any objects. Everything's stored in the computer, and when they want to play a game or they need a deck of cards or whatever, they just have the machine make one for them, just like their food. Um, and it's neat to see the teleporter do that kind of stuff as well. And Lower Decks, they had a funny thing where they were going to have a pie eating contest, I think, but then it got canceled. So there's a scene where there's a guy just chucking all of these pies into the matter converter machine, probably converting them into air, right? Because, I mean, it doesn't really matter. It could be converted into fresh water, into the water tanks or whatever. They're just throwing them away, basically, but in a very clean, cool way. So it was fun to see because they don't go into that technology very much. Same thing with the holodecks. You know, the holodecks creating all of these things, but then being able to just erase them. You know, creating mountains or trees or grass or streams or wherever they're going, lava. You know, and then just turning it back into fresh air again because they're just manipulating the atoms. And they do the same thing to Spock's pants. They turn them into shorts because I guess a lot of them wear shorts. And he says, "Where are my pants?" That's pretty funny. All right. Yeah, so they talk a little bit about Earth history, and they talk about Earth having a second civil war before the eugenics war, which is kind of fun. I don't think that had been talked about in the original series. I don't think they talked about having two civil wars. I think it literally comes from sort of the climate that we have today with Republicans and Democrats, because we only have two parties, which sucks, but it's true. We only have two parties, so everybody gets so split down party lines that it's very easy. If it truly ever became 50-50, another civil war would be a really big possibility. I don't think it is right now, because I don't think it's truly 50-50. Um, but it has to do with the way we vote in America and all that stuff. But um, yeah, it's interesting that they brought that up, that they kind of added that to Star Trek. That in America's past, we had two civil wars before we had the big eugenics war, which basically was World War III, basically. Okay. There's a fun scene where they have to bring two of the aliens up to the ship, which is kind of a big no-no, because if the aliens see the ship, then it could ruin their future. Star Trek has this idea that if we didn't have World War III, we couldn't become the people that we watch on Star Trek. You have to make mistakes to grow and learn. And that's why they don't interfere with other cultures. They want them to make those mistakes. And if they live through all of that and become the people that they could be, have the respect and the empathy for others that they could have after surviving all of that chaos, then they might reach for the stars, they might build these warp engines, and then they can detect them and go meet them. Because they know they've been through the ringer, you know. They know that they've learned a lot and they've grown as a culture because they were able to focus all of their efforts onto building this warp engine, you know, which I guess is a huge deal, right, in their science fiction world. So they have to bring two of the aliens up. One of them does wake up, and he starts running through the ship like a lunatic because he's terrified. And he runs into Uhura, who has studied their culture a little bit, and two things. She can talk to him about a pastime on the planet, which is a sport called tag ball that they have, which is a really fun, cool scene with Nurse Chapel, with the doctor, and Bengay, I think is his name, and then Uhura also. All of them getting to sort of be playful for a little bit during this section. Super fun, super well done. And he's got a line where he says, "You know tag ball?" So that's really cool. They don't have to wipe their memories or anything strange because they end up just introducing themselves to the whole planet. So that's cool. There's a great moment where Spock, they had their faces altered, and Spock, of course, also had his ears altered. And his is wearing off, and it's incredibly painful. So as a Vulcan, you know, with no emotion, he says, the pain is becoming unbearable, which is super funny in and of itself. And then he just lets out this huge scream until his ears go back to normal and he feels better. More than his ears, his whole face goes back to normal. So it just wore off. It was painful and it happened, but it's done now. And it's neat to see that compared with number one. When she got the shot, she didn't yell out because she's been through a lot. But Spock yells out. It's very cool, and it's weird because in a very strange way, it's kind of a callback to the original series because that kind of heightened emotion we don't see that kind of heightened emotion. We see a lot of heightened emotion in TV today, but we don't see it like Star Trek heightened emotion in television much today. And it was fun to see that again. It kind of reminded me of when Spock was mind melding with the lava rock, and he was like, "Pain," you know. It was cool. it's a very cool moment. It's very fun. Um, and as we've talked about, of course, Pike has to go down, talk to these people, and explain to them that they can either nuke themselves or they can join the Federation, which is a really wonderful, really neat capper for this episode, for the first episode. I think it's why they chose to do First Contact as their opening episode, because it's really important to the show as an idea, but it's also a wonderful moment that I think a lot of people would like to have happen. You know, it would be really neat to meet nice aliens, right? To cure a bunch of diseases and to be able to travel through space and to kind of unite as humans. There's so many great positive things that could happen if we didn't feel like we were the center of the universe all the time. So it's a nice dream, you know. So it was really cool to have that be kind of the capper of that first episode, is them deciding to join the Federation. And they go into this wonderful montage of, you know, people drawing the spaceship. These are all the people from the planet because they've decided to join the Federation. So they're drawing the spaceship, and they've got like Spock's face compared to their faces, and they're talking about the differences to school kids. And it's really fun. There's a weird one where you've got these scientists. I don't know what they're doing. They had gloves on and all this stuff. And one of them picks up this little paper cutout of the Enterprise. And I have no idea what that's about. And then they do a neat shot where it sort of morphs into the actual Enterprise flying through space. But it's really, I'm like, what are you guys doing? Why did these scientists have this weird paper cutout of the Enterprise? It's a very bizarre shot, but it's fun. Yeah, good. I've only got a couple more. It's really funny when they, at the end, they're talking about how they're going to change the name to the Prime Directive, right? That's what they're going to call it from now on, because that's what they called it. Well, I think it's what they've kind of called it the whole time. They probably bounced back and forth, but they're going to call it Prime Directive, and of course Pike says that'll never stick, which is super funny. We meet Kirk's brother at the very end, which is cool. He's got his mustache, and they do a fun thing where they keep talking about Kirk through the whole. No, Captain Kirk. They keep talking about Kirk through the whole thing, but they don't say James, right? We all assume they're talking about James T. Kirk from the other show, but then when you meet him, you realize, oh, it's his brother. It's not James T. Kirk. It's his brother. Kirk comes along later, which we'll talk about, but it was really fun to meet the brother like that. So that was cool. And of course, Hummer arrives. I think that's his name, Hummer, something like that. And he's a very cool character. He's blind. He's going to be the head of engineering. Really fun character, really cool. And it's just a great show. And he's got his catchphrase is "hit it," which is fine. It's just fine. This catchphrase thing has sort of become a Star Trek thing, where each captain needs to have their own way to say "go," you know. And they're doing a really fun thing with Spock in the next season. If you've watched the season 2 preview, they've got a Spock part where he's trying to do that, which is super funny. But it's a great show. I really enjoyed it. I feel like they're on the right track. I think they need to be careful of trying to turn it into some kind of soap opera, you know, because that's not what the original Star Trek was, and this is taking the place of the original Star Trek. So they should do the original Star Trek and then have their fun. Like I was saying, it's fun for the actors and for the writers to carry this trauma forward. They want to remember all that, and they want it to infect everything they're doing as performers. But it's not as fun to watch if you don't get to have Star Trek, you know. That shouldn't replace Star Trek. We should have Star Trek. And we should have that too. You know, do that over here. But it's great. It's super fun. I hope that you've got to see it. If you haven't, you can get it on Paramount Plus, or you can just go buy the Blu-ray or the 4K. Either way. Oh, one really brilliant thing about this 4K is one of the episodes in this is, so this is, it's basically a different timeline, which is really interesting and weird, I think. Because what they do is they take a Star Trek episode from the original series and they just redo it. And Pike does it wrong, but Kirk did it right in the original series. And Kirk is in that episode and he tells him how to do it. So they basically have made the same episode twice, once back in 1963 or whenever it came out, and once last year. So they put that original episode in 4K on this set. So if you can buy the 4K, it doesn't have to be the Steelbook. The Steelbook in the plastic case should be exactly the same. If you buy the 4K, you get that original episode from back in 63 or whatever in 4K. And that suggests to me, because of course all that was on film. They can upscale, upscale is not the right word. They can convert that film to 4K digital and release it. It's very hard with Voyager and maybe Deep Space Nine. These are really difficult television shows because they weren't put on film. So to try to make them 4K is too much. I doubt we will ever see, I don't want to say we'll never see new releases of those shows, but they're not going to be 4K. You know, they might get a new Blu-ray release, right? With new footage that was found or whatever. They might redo it to sort of cash in a little, but they won't be able to make it 4K. The amount of work would just be insane. But because the original series is literally on film, if they have that preserved, if they have all the episodes on film, they can make a 4K version of that. So that could be in the works. This could be an indication that that's happening, which is super cool. All right, we've talked a long time. I got to watch this and see if it even worked. I hope it did, because I don't want to redo it. Yeah, thanks so much for watching. If you made it this far, wow, cool. You really like Star Trek, which is great. I do too. And have a great day.